Today, we're making a dinner that celebrates the flavors of fall. We're gonna start off with a roasted red pepper dip known as Muhammara, and it's flavored with walnuts and pomegranate molasses, and it brings the house down every time. For dinner, we're gonna have pork loin, and it's gonna be served with some barley that's studded with butternut squash. And to top the whole thing off, a cast iron German apple pancake. So you have the apples, you have the pork, you have this roasted red pepper and pomegranate dip. It is a lovely way to celebrate the flavors of fall. So to get started, we're gonna make the Muhammara. And as I said, it starts with roasted red peppers. Now you can obviously roast your own red peppers. It tastes fabulous, but I gotta tell you, there's so much flavor in this dip that I have no problem using the jarred roasted red peppers because they work really well here and they're easier. So what you want is jarred roasted red peppers, you want to pat them dry because that canning liquid just kind of blands the whole thing out. So you want to pat away that jarred or canning liquid as much as you can. I'm doubling this dip because, as I mentioned, it's a crowd pleaser. And the other thing is it tastes great if you have leftovers on sandwiches. This dip on roast beef is amazing. Now I'm just gonna chop these up into pieces. We're gonna let the food processor do most of the work, but we'll just give it a bit of a head start because I like the dip to have a little bit of texture. So I don't really wanna run this food processor till it's nice and smooth. I'm gonna leave a little bit of chunkiness. In go the peppers. That was 2 cups of peppers. Again, I'm doubling the recipe. So this is a cup of walnuts. Now these walnuts have been toasted, which I did in the oven. Now for the olive oil, you want about half a cup of extra virgin olive oil. And I don't use the high-end stuff here because again, this dip has a lot of flavor. Those nuances in the really expensive olive oil just get lost here. Next step, the pomegranate molasses. And if you've never bought this stuff, get out there, get yourself a bottle. You'll find yourself putting it on everything. It makes a great glaze for chicken or fish. It's great when you add it to any sort of sauce. It has sort of a deep, round umami flavor. It's a little bit sweet, a little bit bitter, and it has that pomegranate flavor. So a little goes a long way. Again, for a double batch, I'm gonna add about 3 tablespoons. Oh, that smell. It smells a little like sherry vinegar, a little like good port. Fruity, a little cherry. It's almost hard to describe. Now for the spices. We're gonna add some good paprika, about a tablespoon of paprika, some ground cumin. You want 2 teaspoons of that. Just a hit of cayenne, about a 1/4 teaspoon. You can add more or less if you wanna make this spicier. A little bit of table salt, about a teaspoon. So some recipes for this dip add some crackers, and I love this idea because it helps absorb some of the liquid and give the dip a little bit of heft. So the crackers of choice are these Chard whole wheat crackers. They almost taste like Digi-Bidgies. If you don't know what a Digi-Bidgie is, it's a digestive biscuit. It's very English. You have them with tea, but they have this crumbly texture on the sweet weedy side, and it melts perfectly into the dip and adds its own flavor into the mix. Now for some freshness, we're gonna add some scallions. I'm gonna give these a head start, trim the tops. I'm gonna cut some of the greens off and use them as a garnish on the top because I have to say this dip isn't exactly a looker. So a little bit of green on top goes a long way. All right, that's good for the top. The rest of these scallions are gonna go right into the food processor. Whites and all, just gonna trim off the bottoms here and give these guys a rough chop. We'll let the food processor do most of the work, but again, give them a bit of a head start. Ooh, all right, into the food processor goes. And last but not least, a little bit of fresh lemon. Want about scant 3 tablespoons for this double batch. And I'm gonna eye it. I like things pretty lemony, so if I go a little over, I'm usually okay with it. Now we're just gonna whiz it up in the food processor again. I don't like it when it's completely smooth. I like it just a little bit of texture. So about 15 or so pulses. That's perfect. Oh, you can see how it has a little bit of texture. I like that. Not completely smooth, which some recipes have you make it completely smooth. Now, the best part is because it's not a looker, I love to serve it with an array of colorful vegetables. Also, it tastes great with crudité. That's a nice way to help people eat their vegetables. All right, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put it right down the side of this platter. It's gonna save a little of this for sandwiches tomorrow. not much of a looker, but you add a few scallions, it just adds some much needed color. Now, in addition to the scallion greens, or you could use parsley, a quick drizzle of olive oil over the top. Sometimes it's nice, especially if you're working with a decent olive oil. My favorite way to eat vegetables. All right, and endive. I love endive for this because it's a good scooper, but also that sort of slightly bitter flavor of the endive is perfect with this dip. You get the roasted red peppers and the walnuts, and that pomegranate molasses really shines through. This is one of my all-time favorite dips and my favorite way to eat vegetables. Plus it goes really nicely with that pork loin and barley, which I'll show you how to make next.
At Cooks Illustrated, we're food nerds. That's why every recipe we develop involves research, cooking science, and rigorous testing by our team of expert test cooks. Only the highest rated recipes earn a place in our award-winning magazine. Every issue features our latest recipes and discoveries, cooking tips, and equipment and ingredient reviews. Our step-by-step photos and hand-drawn illustrations show you exactly how to succeed. So, are you ready to become the best cook you know? Subscribe to Cooks Illustrated magazine at cooksillustrated.com today.
All right, it's time to cook the pork, and here I have a beautiful pork loin. This is about 3 pounds, but more important than the weight is the dimensions, because we're gonna cook this in cocotte. We're gonna cook it in a Dutch oven at a nice slow oven temperature. That means the pork stays good and juicy and won't overcook. It's actually kind of a foolproof method, and it's hands off, which I love. So what you want is a pork loin that fits in the pot. This is about 7 to 8 inches long, about 4 inches wide, weighs about 3 pounds. And and it's this center cut loin. So there's just one muscle going all the way through. And actually these come pretty well trimmed. You want a little bit of fat on top. We're gonna leave that on, but only about 1/4 inch, which is usually how they come. Now I did tie it with some butcher's twine about every inch. That just helps it hold its shape and cook through more evenly. Now I already patted it dry. We're gonna season it with a little bit of salt and pepper and some fresh thyme. So I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of fresh thyme. I'm gonna leave some of this for in the pot. Now I'm leaving it on this room baking sheet because this kind of makes a mess. I usually get seasoning all over, and the rimmed sides of the pan just helps contain all the mess. All right, a little more salt, a little more pepper, a little more thyme. All right, now I'm just gonna kind of rub the pork around on this baking sheet, try to get up any of the seasonings that are just sitting there. All right, this is ready for the pot. And over here, I have a nice big Dutch oven. And you need a big Dutch oven here so that the pork loin will fit and it will cook properly. I have 2 tablespoons of oil in here. It's been heating up. It's just about to smoke, which is the perfect temperature for getting a nice browning on all sides of the meat. It takes anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes. Turn the heat down if you see the bottom of the pot starting to scorch. So while that browns, let's turn our attention to the barley, which we're gonna cook at the same time. It's kind of like a twofer. So I have a cup of barley over here, and you wanna rinse it under cold water. So here I have a cup of pearl barley. I'm just gonna give it a quick rinse under cold water. Now, a lot of recipes don't have you rinse the barley before cooking, but I like to get away some of that extra starch that's coated in the outside of the barley. Now we're gonna cook this until it has a risotto-like texture, but if you leave that starch on, I think the risotto gets a little stodgy, so I like to rinse it away. Doesn't take long, just in a fine mesh strainer. Now I'm gonna leave the barley in the strainer, let it continue to drain over this bowl until it's time to add it to the pot. All right, time to check on that pork. It is looking, beautiful. All right, I'm gonna take it out of the pot. Look at that browning. Of course, the browning on the pork is beautiful, but the browning in the pot equally as beautiful because that fond is what gives this barley some good flavor. All right, into the pot goes a nicely chopped onion. And depending on how much fat came off the pork during rendering, you may want to add another tablespoon to the pot if it's looking a little dry. Looks like this pork gave us some nice pork fat, so I'm not needing to add any right now. Also gonna add the rinsed barley. And a little bit of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. All right. Now I'm just gonna cook this about 5 minutes or so until the onions get nice and softened. All right, those onions are nicely softened. Time to add a little bit of garlic, 3 cloves to be exact. I'm just gonna use the garlic press and press it right into the pot. And now for the remaining time, it's about a tablespoon. We're just gonna cook this garlic in time, about 30 seconds. You just wanna smell it. Make sure the heat's gotten to it before we start adding the liquids. All right, that looks good. Now we're gonna add a little bit of wine. This is white wine, about 1/4 cup. Gonna add that in. Yeah, it's gonna bubble right away. You almost want it to reduce and evaporate out, let it intensify in flavor. You're gonna start scraping up any brown bits off the bottom of the pot. And now we're gonna add the broth. You need 4 cups of broth, which is very handy because that's 1 entire container. And this broth, you can see it has a lot of color. It's actually a little thicker. This is bone broth. It's not just cooking stock. And both work well here. I feel like the bone broth has a little extra flavor, so I like cooking with it. All right, I'm gonna crank the heat, bring it up to a simmer before we return the pork to the pot. All right, I see bubbles. Now bringing this up to a simmer is pretty important because we're going into a very low oven. So making sure everything inside the pot is hot is key in order to have an accurate cooking time. All right, so off the heat, adding the pork loin back to the pot. Any juices that are captured while the pork is resting, might as well add them to the pot. It's just flavor, right? One more step before we put this in the oven. We're gonna cover the pot with a piece of foil. Now this foil helps trap heat, but also trap moisture, which is important, again, because we're cooking at such a low oven temperature. All right, you wanna make sure that foil is nicely sealed around the pot. On goes the lid, and this is going to a very low oven, 250 degrees. It takes about 35 minutes, though for this big pork loin, might take a little longer, more like 40. And you're looking for an internal temperature on the pork of 135 degrees. All right, and when that pork is done is when we can add the butternut squash and the Swiss chard to the barley. Oh, you can smell it. It smells delicious. All right, the timer just went off. That was 35 minutes. Time to temp the pork. Remember, we're looking for a temperature of 135 degrees. The pork will obviously continue to cook as it rests. On the nose, perfect. All right, so we're gonna get this pork out of the pot. I'm gonna put it right onto this board. Ooh, all right. Oh. Now we're gonna let it rest while we finish the barley. Tent this with the foil. All right, you can see this barley has a lot of liquid left in it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna continue to cook it, reduce that liquid down, and then we'll start adding the butternut squash and the chard. So bring this to a simmer, let it do its thing. Meanwhile, let's focus on the vegetables. I started prepping the chard already. So this is just 8 ounces of chard. This recipe uses both the leaves and the stems, but they have different cooking times. So we're gonna add them to the pot at different times. So leaves cook pretty quickly. We're just cutting them into 1-inch pieces thereabouts. They go in this bowl, obviously. I washed this chard already. And then for the stems, just gonna cut these into pieces, smallish pieces, just a good chop. All right, put them in this bowl over here. Now onto the butternut squash. You just need half of a butternut squash here. To tell you the truth, I love buying the stuff that's pre-peeled and sold shrink wrapped, just a half. That way you're not letting any go bad in the fridge. All right, we're gonna cut these into 1/2-inch pieces. So I cut the neck away from the base because the base has this hollowed out point, whereas the neck is nice and solid. So you can just cut the neck into planks, then cut the planks into strips. All right, so once you cut them into nice, about 1/2-inch thick lengths, you can then just dice it up into 1/2-inch sized pieces. All right, and for this part, I'm just gonna make strips, but kind of in the other direction. That way we'll get nice evenly sized pieces, and evenly sized pieces just cook at the same rate. Cut these down to size. All right, let's take a look at that barley. Oh, it's looking good. You can see a lot of that liquid has disappeared. All right, that barley looks perfect. Time to add the chard stems and the butternut squash. Over we go. All right, just gonna add that right to the pot. We're gonna let these cook until they're just tender. It takes anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. All right, stir that in. Now I'm gonna reduce the heat to medium, put the lid on, and let that cook until the butternut squash is tender. While that squash cooks, it gives us a little bit of time to make the relish or a sauce for the pork. And I love this relish because it doesn't require any cooking and it comes together in a snap. Also, tastes great on so many things. It was originally developed to go on roast turkey and it's brilliant. Pork is good. I love it on a good piece of ham or even roast beef. And it starts with pomegranate seeds, which you can now buy already seeded. I think they're called jewels or gems or something, which is brilliant. You can obviously buy a whole pomegranate and pop the seeds out yourself and wash them. You need 3/4 of a cup all day. To that, we're gonna add 3/4 of a cup of chopped fresh parsley, a shallot that's been nice and finely minced. Now we're gonna add some garlic. We're gonna add 2 cloves of garlic. I'm gonna use a rasp style grater here to get a nice fine paste on this garlic. That'll just help it incorporate nicely into the relish without having any big chunks. Let's see what's on the back of this. Oh, there we go. Now we're gonna add some olive oil, 1/2 cup of olive oil, and now is the time to bring out the good stuff. Because we're not heating this, you will taste the nuances of the olive oil. And again, it's a sauce, so it kind of matters here. So 1/2 cup of the good stuff. There we go. And a little bit of lemon juice, about 2 tablespoons. Gotta use the fresh stuff. 1, 2, that looks pretty good. That was a juicy lemon. All right, and a little bit of salt, 3/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. If you're using table salt, you use half the amount because the crystal sizes are smaller and they measure differently. So 3/4 of a teaspoon, which is a scant teaspoon, which is what I'm doing. There we go. That's all this relish needs. Doesn't need to sit for too long for the flavors to develop. It's pretty good right off the bat, but it holds for a day or two as well. So it is a winner. All right, put this in a nice bowl. Oh, it's such a looker too. All right, let's take a look at that butternut squash. Oh, that smells so good. It smells like fall. You can see a lot of that liquid has evaporated. It's starting to look risotto-y, which is good. So at this point, you want to make sure the butternut squash is good and tender. You can taste it. You can mush one against the side of the pot. It's good to go. So the last thing to add while this barley's on the stove is the chard leaves. And they just take a minute or two to wilt down. Oh, so colorful. Again, I love all the veg. All right, let those cook for a few minutes. Now let's take a look at this pork loin that has been resting. She's a beauty. Let's snip off this twine and get rid of it. All right, now slice into it. I like doing thin slices for this. Oh, so nice and evenly cooked. And you can see just how juicy it is. I'll get one more out of this end piece. Yeah. Oh, all right, back to the pot. Oh, those leaves are just wilted, which is perfect. They still are nice and green. Now we're gonna take this to the board. It looks like fall, doesn't it? All right, to finish this sort of barley risotto with butternut squash, we're gonna add some finely grated Parmesan cheese. So about 1/2 cup of finely grated Parm, 2 teaspoons. It's official measuring using the cap of the cider vinegar. So cider vinegar, you want 2 teaspoons. I don't know, I've always watched my mother and my grandmother use the cap for measuring, so I do it kind of automatically. That cap looked like about a teaspoon, so we'll go with it. Stir this in. Season it with a little salt and pepper, because we haven't really added any pepper to it at this point. And I make this all the time, so I know the amount of salt we added in the beginning is perfection. Oh yeah. That creamy risotto-y like texture, which is just perfect, but the barley hasn't disintegrated completely. It's still got some nice toothsome bits. Now for plating, this is kind of a home style meal. So I have a bowl here, which is how I like to do it. I like to take a big scoop of the barley risotto. Oh yeah. And then we're gonna take some of the pork and put it right on top. Look how juicy that is. And then of course, pomegranate and parsley relish. Oh, it's pretty colorful. When you think about the colors of fall, they're a bit sometimes on the muted side, but this is just so lively looking. Going right for the pork in that relish. The pork is perfectly cooked. It's still tender and juicy. And the relish with the bursts of flavor from the pomegranate seeds It's a great combination. And then there's this barley risotto. I love it has that little natural sweetness from the butternut squash. It is the perfect fall meal. And to think, to follow it up, we still have that German apple pancake that we're gonna make in a cast iron skillet.
Are you ready to take your cooking to the next level?
Introducing the complete America's Test Kitchen TV show cookbook.
Featuring every recipe from every episode of America's Test Kitchen. That's thousands of recipes. That texture is unbelievable. Reviews,
gadgets you didn't know you needed.
and tips.
Yes, there's some terrible choices, but there are also some amazing choices.
We've spilled all of our secrets and included our insider notes alongside each recipe.
Plus, there's a handy shopping guide so you know exactly what to grab when you're at the store.
And of course, it makes an excellent gift. Get your copy today at americastestkitchen.com.
All right, it's time to make a German apple pancake, which is a really pantry-friendly dessert, also good for brunch. And you make it in a skillet, and you can use any kind of skillet here, but I particularly love using cast iron because it gets the edges good and brown and crisp. But the thing about cast iron is you have to heat it up ahead of time. So I'm gonna put this on the stove, let it heat up for 3 minutes. So it takes that long for the heat really to work its way into that iron. All right, let that heat up, and then meanwhile, prep the apples. Now, I love using Granny Smith apples here. It's because they have a nice tart flavor, but also they tend to hold their shape after they're sliced and cooked. So you want about 1.25 pounds of apples, which is about 3 big or 4 littles. And you just want to peel them to get that skin off first. All right. Now we're going to core and slice the apples. You want to slice them on the thin side, about 1/4 inch thick. The way I like to do it for this dessert is I like coring right through the apple, and I like cutting out the core with a knife on an angle. Now I'm just going to slice these into 1/4 inch thick slices. Okay, last one here. There we go. Put these in a nice bowl, bring them over to our skillet. That skillet should be hot by now. Oh, good and hot. It's been over medium heat. Now I'm gonna add a tablespoon of unsalted butter. Just wanna melt that in the skillet. All right, to this, we're gonna add 1/4 cup of brown sugar and the apples. Okay, so these are just gonna cook on medium heat, 5 or 10 minutes till the apples are gorgeous and caramelized, but they haven't lost their shape. All right, so while those cook, it's time to make the batter that goes over top of the apples, turns it into a German apple pancake. Now the batter, well, like a pancake batter, but a little more custardy. And you make it either using a blender or a food processor. Both work here. I like using the blender because it's easier to clean. So first up, we have some half and half. This is 3/4 cup. Into the blender it goes. 2 large eggs, right into the blender. To this, we're gonna add a little sugar, just a tablespoon, some vanilla, a teaspoon, and 1/2 teaspoon salt. All right, in you go. Now we're gonna blend this up, break up the eggs, get a nice smooth batter before we add the flour. All right, that's good. Now it's time to add the flour, just 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. There we go, right into the blender. I'm gonna puree it a little longer in the blender and we'll have a nice smooth batter. All right, that's it. You can see those apples are gorgeous and caramelized, but they've still held their shape, which is perfect. So I'm gonna spread the apples into a nice even layer. Batter goes on over top, nice and even. All right, now this goes into the hottest oven you can have, a 500-degree oven. Bakes for about 10 to 12 minutes, but it gets gorgeous and puffy. And halfway through baking, you wanna rotate the pan so that it bakes evenly. All right, in it goes. Oh, that is a German apple pancake. You can see how souffled it is. I'm gonna get it right out of the hot pan. I'm using my favorite spatula that's very flexible. And I'm gonna slide this right onto the counter. Oh, all right, to top it off with just a little powdered sugar. I just like using a fine mesh strainer, putting a little sugar in it, putting it right over the top. And that's it. Like I said, it's a looker in the skillet, but once you slide it out, not so much, but it's all about the flavor. Now, some people like to serve this with whipped cream or even a little vanilla ice cream. I like eating it just as it is with the powdered sugar. Oh, and you can see that custardy, pancakey bit around all the apples. That's what it's about. The apples are perfect, soft and caramelized. Oh, and that pancakey, almost popover-like custard around the apples. Delicious and so pantry friendly. You could really make this anytime. So good and so easy. See you next time. If you're ready to take your cooking to the next level, head over to americastestkitchen.com and get a free trial of our ATK Essential membership. While you're there, you can sign up for our free email newsletters and download our app. So, what are you waiting for?